Hello, welcome back to my channel, Biblical Validity. And we're in the middle of the 6 days of creation from a scientific perspective. And this video talks about day 4. This is like about my fourth major try of videoing this. And I'm going to try my best not to ramble and stick to the point so I don't make this too long. Your time's valuable, as is mine. But there's a lot to talk about on each day of creation. It's amazing. So what does it mean to talk about it from a science perspective? And now, let's concede one point here. The majority of the world does not believe this Genesis account in the Bible. And even among Christians, I don't even know if half of the Christians believe it because we're all taught, and I believe this too, that science has the answers. Science can get the answers. And science contradicts this version of the Bible, the Genesis creation account. And we obviously live in a very ancient universe, about 13.8 billion years old, and everything sprang up. Life just appeared out of non-life, and everything evolved. This whole universe evolved, and matter and energy appeared out of nowhere in a big bang. So apparently nothing can create all the mass and energy we can observe in the universe. Uh, all those things. And honestly, I think it takes a lot more faith to believe all that, then perhaps we do have a creator God who created all this. And, and could he do it in 6 days? Why not? That's why we call him God. And God lives outside of time. That's what you got to remember. God lives outside of time. 24 hours days doesn't matter to God because he's not in our world that in that way, in the time sense. So, to him, just take as long as he wants. Okay, so um, here I am today. I'm not wearing my usual coat jacket, and I really don't think anybody cares. But it's I forgot to get it. I'm kind of under the gun because I need to get this done so I can mow the yard. And I'm in the woods. Well, yes and no. There's my cabin. There it is. There's my cabin back there. I'm actually inside that. This is a photograph. And I think I took this picture a couple years ago. This is on the path leading to the cabin. And but it looks pretty much the same now. There was one big tree here on the right side of the screen. We call it the Widowmaker tree. It blew over about a year and a half ago. And I'll tell you about that someday. That has elements of a small miracle to it. Incredible the way that thing blew down. Anyway, I won't go there today. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm going to move into this day 4, and we'll look at all the science that I can think of, and I'm sure I'm probably missing some stuff, that explains each day of creation. And what did God come up with? What was the science he had he created and relied upon in order to create this universe? That's the younger creationist view. And so it's pretty amazing. And you find out that the sequence of events in the 6 days of creation, a lot of that just has to come in order. Okay. And how in the world does some old guy 3,400 years ago named Moses, we think Moses, most people think Moses wrote the the first 5 books of the Bible, including the book of Genesis. He didn't know any science. No one knew this science back then. They're pretty much clueless. And so, yeah, but yet everything fits. Everything fits. There's really no contradictions that I can come up with. All right, well, let's move on here. So, what happens on the day 4 of creation? God creates the sun, moon, and stars. And boy, that's a big deal. In fact, spoiler alert, this is a very big deal. Okay. Oh, yeah, yeah. But every day of creation is a very big deal. All right, so let's see here. Now, here are the first 2 verses. There might be 5 or 6 verses. So, beginning with verse 14 of chapter 1 of Genesis, and God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. All right, so what's going on here? These lights are, one thing, they're not stationary to our point of view. They're moving, all right? And you can't blame people in ancient times to think that, well, yeah, I think the Earth must be at the center of the universe because it seems like everything's spinning around us. All right, now the Bible doesn't say that, and there's no ridiculous claim in the Bible that says the Earth is at the center of the universe and everything revolves around the Earth. Although, honestly, I think it's possible the Earth is at the center of the universe. It sure looks like it, but that's a long, long story. Anyway, God put us out here on the one of the spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy, and that's where we are. And it's a safe place to be in this galaxy. Now, the Earth spins; it rotates, dividing time into days. So, of course, one full rotation of the Earth is 24 hours. And God has been talking about evening and morning. So now He gave us a permanent mechanism for dividing days into sunlight and darkness. Because on this day He gives us the sun and the moon and all the stars. But we only see the sun, roughly speaking, 12 hours a day. It varies where you are and so forth. But half a day roughly is sunlight, half is darkness. And together it's 24 hours. Okay. So you needed the Earth spinning. And let's see. Now, the Earth rotates around the sun. And so that divides time in 2 years. 1 year is one full orbit of the Earth around the sun. As Earth, we are moving approximately 66,000 miles per hour in our orbit. We're roughly 93 million miles from the sun. And so we spin around about every year. Actually, a year is 365 days. What is it? 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and I forgot how many seconds. And so that's about a year. And so it's not exactly 365 days, and we have to adjust the calendar for using leap days and leap years about every 4 years in order to keep everything kind of in sync. But it's important that we had daylight and darkness. It's important that we have orbits around the sun giving us years. And the other important thing, because the Earth is tilted, now the Earth is tilted at, I think it's about 23.5 degrees, all right? So if it was 0 degrees, it would be like this going around the sun. And but it's tilted, about 23.5 degrees. That means part of the year you have sunlight shining more directly on you. That would be, in the northern hemisphere, that would be summer. And down here, it would be winter in the other hemisphere. But when you spin around, that gets reversed. So we get winters and summers and falls and springs. And now, and that was convenient because it divides the year into 4 seasons, setting up a kind of a rhythmic pattern for growing crops. And so, although I'm not totally sure, I think if the Earth was not tilted at all, we might not be able to grow as many crops. All right, I think this might give us some flexibility that we can grow more crops, grow more food. All right. Now, I'm not totally sure of that, but that's a thought. If we weren't tilted at all, the equator would just stay really, really hot, and the poles would get even colder than they are now, I think. And so, I don't know. Anyway, now even the moon gets into the act. It rotates around the Earth or orbits the Earth about once per month. It's around 28 days, actually. Around 28 days, the moon rotates around the Earth. Now, the moon is very interesting because we only see one side of the moon, and because the moon spins itself, its day is the same as its year, if you call it going around the Earth 1 year from the moon perspective. Then the moon's day is the same as a year because it spins at the same as speed where we would only look at one side, and it's tidally locked is what they call that. Okay, and it's kind of easy to see, I guess, if you look at the physics, how that could happen. So it wasn't until about 1959 that anybody had ever seen the backside of the moon. So around 1959, the Soviets sent up a satellite that went around the backside of the moon, took some pictures, and sent them back to Earth. And it was our first look at the other side of the moon, and boy, what a surprise that was. Oh, that was a surprise. I'll talk about that at the end of this video. The backside of the moon looks vastly different than the front side of the moon. Pretty amazing. And it's kind of fun to think about how could that happen. Okay, so now actually planets, moons, stars, and galaxies all appear to rotate. They all appear to spin. And they also orbit. Okay, there's a rotation in terms of orbit rotation. So where did all that energy for rotation in the universe come from? If the universe began in a godless Big Bang event expanding outwards from a single point. All right. So in trying to predict the past, even though we can't go back and look at it, okay, uh, it makes sense to the scientific mainstream that because the universe is expanding now, that if you run the clock backwards, it they had to stop at a single point in time. And so apparently the universe started at this single point, according to the Big Bang theory, and where everything in the universe was packed into a single measure point. And they've done tons of math and physics on that, the theory of all this. We don't know if that happened. The Big Bang is a theory, just like the six-day creation is a theory. All right. I can't prove the six-day creation to you, and that we were, here 6,000 years ago. And I can show you a lot of evidence for that. But it's a theory, just like the Big Bang is a theory. And there's a bunch of those theories on which, mainstream science rests its faith on. Okay, so where did all that energy come from? Because when I typed this up, I thought, well, where did that come from? Yeah, well, let's take planets for example. Suppose there's this big ball of gas, or it's a solid rocky thing, and it's coming near a star like our sun. And if it's moving fast enough, but does not crash into the sun's going to grab it gravitationally and force it to orbit. All right, so that's where you get orbits. The and the galaxies, they orbit around a center of mass, a center of gravity, you might say, in the galaxy. And so it's a natural spinning rotation caused by gravitational forces, the laws of gravity. As far as how does all the planets and the stars, why are they rotating? The sun rotates. It spins around. And it's kind of interesting because it spins, uh, because it's all gaseous, it's a different rate of speed, whether you're at the equator of the sun or at the North Pole of the sun, it's spinning at different speeds because it's all gaseous. It's not one big rocky thing. Anyway, where did that come from? Well, and again, the theory of mainstream science, and these are good theories. I'll grant them that. That everything started, like the Earth started as a big gaseous cloud, and so does the sun. The sun is about well over 99% of the mass of our universe. It's almost everything in. I said universe. I meant solar system. The the sun is really the big behemoth of the solar system because it contains most of the mass. And so it too, according to the theory, was a big gaseous cloud, and the force of gravity, brought hydrogen, maybe some helium, and maybe some other elements together to form this cloud. And eventually, it just contracts under the force of gravity. It keeps pulling it together, and well, when that happens, it's kind of like I kind of like this analogy. It's kind of like when a sink drains, the water starts to spin. And so a spin, there's some kind of imbalance that starts to cause a spin. And that's why the sun is spinning, the earth is spinning, and everything else is spinning out there. So that's where it comes from. Now let's make a note here. It appears, when people look through telescopes, it appears that the universe is in some kind of mature form. And now if you buy into, accept the New Age creationist view that we're 6,000 years old approximately. God created all this in a short amount of time, 6 days. Even had time left in the week to take a day off. Okay, if that's true, then it looks like God created everything in a mature state. Things were more or less finished, and here we are in the middle of it. And does that make sense? Well, think about animals. Here's the question: what came first, the chicken or the egg? Very easy. It's got to be the chicken, right? Where would the egg come from? and if it hatched, then who's going to take care of the little chick? Who's going to feed it? And so God created the chicken and all the other animals in mature form so they could begin procreating. Very likely, he created the plants on day 3 in mature form already with berries and fruits and nuts and things on there, because by day 5, he's putting birds birds out there to eat, and day 6 all come the other animals. They have to have something to eat. So I would assume under this model, the New Age creationist model, that God would have created all that in a mature format. So anyway, that's just something to think about there. Okay, so maybe I've talked about this. Gravitational pull of large objects such as stars causes nearby smaller objects such as planets to move into rotational orbits. Yeah, okay. And that's pretty easy to calculate. I've done the physics on this. It's and the math and the calculus and all that stuff. It's very good calculations. It fits everything we're seeing out there. You might say this is one of the vital prerequisites for sustaining life on Earth. Earth's orbit is nearly circular. All right, so there are no large changes in sunlight energy disrupting the possibility of life. If the Earth was just wandering through the universe without, orbiting a sun, then how could you have life? Okay, it'd be too cold for the most part. And now orbits can be very stretched out, very elongated. All right. Now Earth's orbit is very circular. Johannes Kepler, around 1600, by the way, he was a big believer in the Bible. Kepler, last great astronomer that I can think of before the telescopes, he figured out that planets orbit the sun in a mathematical ellipse, which is, think of that as an oval. Well, they can be, a circle is kind of a special form of an ellipse, where everything is even. And so Earth is pretty close to circular. There's a little math calculation for ellipses called the eccentricity. And the eccentricity for the Earth, I think, is around 0.1. It's close to 0, which means it's almost circular. I believe there are 2 planets, and I include Pluto as a planet. Not everybody does, but everybody loves, my generation loves Pluto. Pluto and Mercury, I believe, is the other one. They have the most stretched out, elongated orbits. Their eccentricity is about 0.2. Comets orbits the sun. Almost all of them do. We've seen a couple of them that are coming in so fast that they're not going to orbit the sun, but almost all comets orbit the sun, and most of them have very elongated, stretched out orbits, and close to eccentricity, close to 1. Okay, and you could live on a planet like that because you spend too much time way out in space with very almost little sunlight, warming the planet, and then once in a while it gets close to the sun. It just would not work for Earth. So we have to agree that, yeah, it's if we're going to have life on Earth, we need a pretty circular orbit. And that's what we got. Galaxies are just very large clusters of stars orbiting about a center of mass. And in many galaxies, they believe that many galaxies have a black hole at the center, including the Milky Way. And I think I heard in one video, astronomer or astrophysicist say that we have a pretty modest black hole at the center. If there was a big black hole at the center of a galaxy, we might not be able to sustain life on this planet. And we also, if we were much closer to, I would think if we were much closer to the center of the Milky Way, there'd be a lot of stars in a nearby neighborhood, and it'd be just too much solar radiation and perhaps heat in order to sustain life. So here's what we're starting to see. Let's say, well, okay, we can marvel at how God made this planet so perfect for life, and wax eloquent about that. And then the scientific materialists, the atheists, and all those people, they say, well, of course it is. We're here. It has to be perfect that way. And so we can agree on something. Yes, of course. The fact that we're here means that the conditions of life were wonderfully perfect. Okay, so what is this? Let's see. I think I've already talked about this screen. So you can read it, but I think I already talked about it. So let me move on. I'm trying to keep this running so I don't run it too long. So if the solar system has all these planets and moons in close proximity to our sun, and if all these formed from gaseous clouds, why are the chemical compositions of all these large bodies significantly different? Yeah, you look at the chemicals we find on Earth. The most stable element there is iron. Iron is so stable it can't be split apart in a fission process. It can't be fused together in a fusion process. It's kind of the bottom of the well. Is what you can do with an element. You can't do anything with iron to change its chemistry that way, and so you can't somehow force it into a different element. All right, so anything above iron on the periodic scale, anything more massive or denser or heavier, I should say, maybe heavier than atom iron, is believed by mainstream science to come from supernova, and it's a good theory. And like I say, yeah, well, if God created the universe in a mature form, then we need some of those heavier elements okay, to survive. Some of those are key elements of life. We do need heavier elements than iron. The um, the lighter elements generally come from fusion processes in stars. All right. I don't know if that's 100% totally accurate. Okay, I'm not an expert on all this, but there is a process that we can observe in stars where lighter atoms are fusing together into heavier atoms, and the highest you can go is iron. Okay, but why is the chemical compositions all different? Yeah, why isn't the Earth have the same chemicals as Saturn and Jupiter and Mercury and Venus and all that stuff? They're all different, and all the moons are different that I know of. Our moon has a different chemical composition than Earth, and certainly certainly a lot less water than Earth. Actually, the moon has a little bit of ice on it, but no water like we have. And you can go down the list. Where's all the oxygen on the moon? It may have blown off into space. I don't know, but it has different chemicals than we do, and everything does. So why is that? Why is that? Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm sure science has thought about this and has their theories. All right, so I don't want to get too critical. They're very smart people working on these ideas. Okay, now in time, full moons. I'm getting into the little sacred part. It's not the science part of this scripture, but God did mention part of this was to mark sacred events, and so one I can think of is Passover on the Jewish calendar, um, celebrating the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. God parted the Red Sea. They crossed over on a land bridge, which we can find that could be where they crossed. And someday we'll do a video series on the Exodus. It's amazing the evidence that supports this. Can't wait to do it. So yeah, they figure out when Passover is, and Jesus allowed himself to be crucified on the Passover, and part of that was interesting because in those days in crucifixions, they usually left the bodies up there for a couple of days. Maybe the birds would come down, start picking at them, and they start rotting on the cross. And some people they just let hang up there for a couple of days until they died. And but for Passover to placate the Jews in Jerusalem, the Romans would let them take them all down and bury the bodies. So no one really hung up permanently on Passover that I know of. So Jesus was buried on Good Friday, we call it. And although I think there's maybe he got crucified on Thursday. I don't know. There's some discussion out there. How did we get to 3 days? He rose again 3 days. If they killed him on Friday and came back on Sunday, that sounds like 2 days to me. So there are some good cases to be made. The actual timeline that happened. All right. Anyway, so this is all timed to so the body could be brought down, put in a cave and buried, and then Jesus, of course, rose from the dead. And there's tremendous evidence for the resurrection. Oh, historical evidence. So someday we'll do some videos on that. I'm sure there's other full moons that mark things on the calendar. Blood moon. This is interesting. A blood moon is when the moon is eclipsed and it appears a deep red, and they're not that uncommon. Maybe every year there's one or two of these lunar eclipses. I've seen a number of them. One of them I saw by total accident. I woke up in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning and walked outside and oh wow, I didn't know about that lunar eclipse going on. I saw the blood moon. So why they call it blood moons. Okay, so during a lunar eclipse, the Earth comes between the sun and the moon and blocks out all the sunlight hitting the moon. But there is the corona around the sun, the gaseous stuff spewing out from the sun. We still see that during an eclipse, and so the moon, that light would hit the moon. It's not very bright, and all you get is a very deep red, and so those are nicknamed the blood moons. Could that have been this year and last year? Could that have been somehow prophetic? I think you got to concede we live in some very strange times. Very, very tense times here. Some might say there's a big spiritual battle going on here on Earth. It's just gone nuts. Anyway, there's an event on the Jewish calendar called Purim, and it ties into the book of Esther, where there's this right-hand man to I think it's the king of Persia, um, gets insulted and wants to destroy all the Jews, wants to just murder and kill all the Jews off. His name was Haman. And Esther was the favorite queen of this king, and he didn't know she was Jewish. And anyway, it's a great story. You should read it. And at the last moment, Esther steps up to the plate, tells the king that he's trying to kill all of us, including me. And king gets mad and ends up hanging Haman and his 10 sons. So it's a big drastic turnaround which saved the Israelites. Israel had a covenant with God. They were the chosen people. I'll tell you what, they don't come off looking great in the Old Testament. All right. You can't say that Jews wrote the Old Testament to make the Israelites look good. For the most part, it doesn't happen. Okay? There were some very good kings in those days. King David, I think Hezekiah, and Solomon was good for a while. There were a couple of good ones. But anyway, don't get too sidetracked here. But so on Purim, last year and this year, both there were blood moons somewhere on Earth. So I wouldn't think that's very common. That the timing of that's kind of unusual. And does that mean anything prophetic? I don't know. I don't know. Here's another one. And a full solar eclipse may signify something prophetic. Now, can I prove that statement? Probably not. Probably not. But let me give you an example of what happened during the last solar eclipse in America. Okay, there are 7 towns in America named Nineveh. That's a biblical name. Nineveh, 7 of them. And I think might be one in Canada, and there might be one in Bermuda. There's only like 8 or 9 in the world named Nineveh. Nineveh was a town in the Old Testament, and mentioned is actually a focus of the book of Jonah. Yeah, the guy that got swallowed by the whale, right? That story. Actually, there was a extinct sea creature, big fish, which had the kind of throat that could actually swallow a human. And I can't tell you the name. I saw it, and I should have written it down. Okay, but so that part at least, yeah, we can't prove the book of Jonah. No one wrote down what happened in the city of Nineveh, and no one probably witnessed Jonah coming out of the big fish after 3 days alive. When you think about it, it's kind of a little bit prophetic about Jesus. Jonah gets probably killed by this big fish swallowing him, and then he gets spit out after 3 days. He's back to life. And he had been in disobedience with God. And he had agreed to be a prophet for God, and then he refused to go to Nineveh for various reasons. Well, he certainly got the memo on that one. Okay, when he comes out of the fish, he says, "All right, Lord, I'll go to Nineveh." He goes to the town, and he warns the king of Nineveh that God is going to wipe out that town because of all their evil. They better repent. So here's your chance to repent. God will spare you if you get the town to repent. And that's exactly what happens according to the Old Testament, the book of Jonah. The king gets very humble, puts on sackcloth and ashes, and gets everybody to do that. And they repent for the evil going on in that town, and God spares them. It's a great story. Can't prove it. Okay. Nope. Sorry, can't prove it. But it's a very nice story. And I think it really happened, but I'm not going to convince anybody. Okay. So I'd have to leave it at that. So back to the solar eclipse. It was it 2 years ago? I've seen 2 solar eclipses. I've been very lucky. And the second one was not far from where I live. We had to go to another city to see the full eclipse. And it anyway, the map of the eclipse was seen, not always a total solar eclipse, but at least some part of the eclipse could be seen in all 7 towns named Nineveh in the United States. Every one of them happened to be on the line of where that eclipse was. Wow. Now, could that be prophetic? Is there a kind of a warning here that we need to start repenting for our ways here in the United States? And so I just leave it at that. Okay. I know to the to an atheist mindset, to a scientific materialist mindset, to a non-Christian mindset, that just sounds silly. All right. No. Okay. Let's leave it at that. All right, let's finish the verses. Verse 16, God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. Wow, that sentence blows me away. Um, that last sentence is the greatest understatement of all time. 5 words. Ah, he also made the stars. Okay. And I understand why this is hard to digest. And part of why I have this channel, part of why there are loads of channels by Christians looking at the science of the Bible, and so that's yeah. Why not? Why not? God, because God lives outside of time. He could create all the other stars in one day. Okay, so big understatement. Okay. Personally, I think it takes a lot more faith to believe that this universe came out of nothing. Something came out of nothing, violating the first law of thermodynamics. That the universe had a beginning, um, and because if the universe did not have a beginning, then we would be in heat death according to the second law of thermodynamics. I explained this in detail in some other videos, and so to me, it takes a lot of faith to believe that life came from nothing. All the elements and energy, all the mass came from nothing. A lot more takes a lot more faith to believe that, I believe, than to believe the Judeo-Christian account in the Old Testament. Okay. Verse 17, God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. All right, so there ends the fourth day of creation. Now, one thing everyone should agree on is that the sun is the perfect distance from the earth. It's a very stable star compared to most stars in terms of solar wind, violent sunspots, radiation, and also most stars could be having a lot more. Their brightness is erratic, and so it caused a lot of problems having life if it wasn't stable. So we agree on that. And I believe everybody in the science community would agree on that. Like, why else are we here? Everything has to work perfectly. So now our galaxy, the Milky Way, has a modest black hole. I think I talked about this. You can read that. I think I've more or less mentioned the black hole earlier. All right. Trying to get to this video quicker. Our solar system contains well over 100 planetary moons. Okay, Jupiter and Saturn have the most, dozens, I believe. I believe Venus and Mercury do not have any moons. Even Pluto has 3 moons now. There's a big one called Charon, and they just recently found 2 little guys out there by Pluto. So now Earth is the only one with a moon that actually appears to be about the same size and shape of the sun from our perspective on Earth. Now, and you couldn't blame people in ancient times to think that, well, the sun and the moon are the same size. Of course they're not. Of course they're not. It's a perspective issue there. But it's an amazing coincidence. Now, the moon is about 400 times smaller in diameter than the sun, but it exists about 400 times as far from the sun. And so that kind of balances out and allows the moon to cover the face of the sun perfectly, so we get a total solar eclipse, but also reverses it. The Earth can cover the face of the sun relative to the moon, and the moon gets in total shadow. So we have total solar eclipses and total lunar eclipses because we had this very unique situation where the moon is roughly about the same size as the sun when you factor in the 400 times distance and all that stuff. Okay. So pretty amazing coincidence. And I know this is randomness in the scientific world. Oh, just random luck. It just happened that way. Yeah, well, okay. Well, yeah. How many coincidences are you willing to live with? Okay. And, we have 160 moons, maybe. I don't know the exact count in the solar system that we can measure. And none of them come close to this situation. And God said he wanted to use it for, to mark times and sacred events and things like that. So, there you go. Okay. Now, the scientific mainstream believes that the Earth and solar system are approximately 4.5 billion years old. It's kind of interesting where they got that number. Eventually, I'll do a series of videos on looking at all the evidence for this being a young solar system. And so that'll be interesting to get into. And we'll examine where they get to 4.5 billion years. And and I don't want to be too critical because they are attempting to do real science observation here, and so I don't want to get too critical of their point of view, even though I don't believe it. Yet there's a growing amount of evidence that the solar system is much more likely to be very young by comparison, and could fit the version of creation in Genesis. All right, so as I mentioned, I'll do a future series with an overview of evidence, but there are great videos out there by PhD scientists outlining this emerging evidence for a much younger Earth and solar system. A lot of great videos out there by real experts in the field. I'm not an expert in any scientific field. I'm a mathematician, and so my purpose here is to try to give you a kind of a bird's eye global view of things. And if you're quite interested, please go see the experts and get more details if you really want to do a deeper dive into all this. So I think that's my purpose in all this. Okay, more in the spirit of this video series on the sixth day of creation, I'll outline some of the intricate details God thought of besides what I've mentioned so far. All right, so how do stars shine? You know what? No one could answer this until about 1938. It was a scientist named Hans Bethe, B-E-T-H-E. Hans Bethe figured this out in 1938. I think I heard the story. I don't know if it's apocryphal, that the Beta turned to his wife and says, "You know what? Right now, I'm the only one on Earth that knows why the sun is shining." So yeah, and but people have been working on this, and he was able to confirm it by computation. All right, does that prove this is why the sun was shining? Well, we can't go to the sun and test it. We can't build one experimentally. Well, we kind of did. I'll tell you about that in a minute. I would say Hans Bethe did not prove this is why the sun is shining, but he did find a theory that matched it extremely well. And I'll tell you in a minute why we know this has to be a fact now. So almost all stars are large balls of hydrogen. At the core of each star, the enormous pressure forces hydrogen to fuse together into helium. Now, I think our sun, I read our sun is at least 3/4 hydrogen and roughly 1/4 helium. It's more 3-to-1 ratio there, you might say. But anyway, at the core of each star, the enormous pressure forces hydrogen to fuse together into helium. I think it's very fascinating. So 4 atoms of hydrogen will fuse together under pressure to form 1 atom of helium. Okay, and because the mass of the 4 hydrogen atoms slightly exceed that of 1 atom of helium, the remaining mass gets converted into energy according to Einstein's E equals mc squared. So how's that energy manifest itself? Well, in terms of heat and photons of light, creates light. And it would not help if 1 atom of helium weighed less than 4 hydrogen atoms. Could that be possible? Anyway, we wouldn't have that excess energy to play with to turn into heat energy and light energy and perhaps radiation energy. So it had to be balanced that way. And I would say God gave it an exquisite balance in the way he tuned the, I believe it's I'm not a great expert in this, I think it was the weak nuclear force has something to do with this computation. Anyway, it worked out perfect. And so that's why the sun shines. There's leftover energy, and some of that comes to us as photons of light. Okay, now you might say, here we go. You might say this theory was confirmed when we successfully detonated hydrogen bombs starting in the 1950s. So yeah, we were able to experimentally verify this. I don't, the best way we could. Um, the way a hydrogen bomb works, there's an atomic nuclear fission bomb at the center of it, where some uranium or plutonium gets split apart in a fission process, splitting those atoms. It detonates. It forms like an atomic bomb, like the one we had to drop on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. But then that explosion creates the enormous pressure to take the hydrogen in that bomb and fuse the hydrogen atoms into helium. And so you end up with a fusion reaction, which creates a lot more energy. And so the hydrogen bombs are much more deadly even than those uranium or plutonium bombs, the fission bombs. So they're big crowd pleasers. A friend of mine called those big nukes. That's a crowd pleaser. Okay, okay, that's that. Now there are varying stages of maturity, and the science mainstream would reasonably claim that much older stars, where heavier atoms are formed in various processes, including a similar fusion process, ending ultimately in iron and very massive stars. Now, very large stars eventually explode as supernova, where it's believed that the atoms heavier than iron are formed. Okay, good theories, good theories. Is it fact? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it can be observed from supernova that they can find heavier atoms appearing there. I don't know. So, yeah, like I said, if God created this universe in a stage of maturity, then yeah, there's nothing wrong with these theories. What about other planets supporting life? Well, that's a great question, and particularly now since UFOs, or sometimes they're called UAPs, um, are in the news recently. It seems like there's a lot of UFO activity out there, and I'll eventually do a video on that. I don't. It's very interesting. Actually, UFOs, in one respect, alien abductions actually point to Jesus. It's amazing, amazing, and tons of evidence for this. So, which, yeah, mainstream science would ignore. But I'll talk about this someday. It's out there. If you dig around, you'll find things like this. And no, it's not nut job wacko stuff. Let's just say there's hundreds and hundreds of instances where people claiming to be abducted by an alien cried out to Jesus, and that whole event just vanished, disappeared suddenly. The whole alien abduction thing was just disappeared, calling out to Jesus, and so that's very well documented, highly documented. It's not nut job stuff. It works. It works. Okay, so what about other planets supporting life? Well, even the Bible does not explicitly forbid life on other planets. Yeah, it doesn't say God didn't create life anywhere else. Personally, I don't think he did. I don't think he needed to. But I can't prove it. There are a number of factors required for a planet to support life. Now, I've heard 14 as a number of factors required. There's probably some disagreement out there. What does it take for a planet to support life? One obvious one, it has to be in a habitable zone, near the star or its own sun, to create the perfect amount of heat energy and so forth, and less radiation. And there's all kinds of factors in order for even to be thinking about another planet supporting life. All right, the latest count, I'll look this up. I think it's interesting. Is latest I could find is 6,286 confirmed exoplanets, which many more awaiting confirmation. Now, an exoplanet is detected by the astronomers, and here's how it works. If they're observing a star, and at some point the sunlight from the star is diminishes a little bit. And if that happens on a periodic cycle, they keep an eye on these things. If it happens at a periodic cycle, then they can reasonably conclude there's a planet orbiting that sun. They can make very good measurements, detailed measurements to figure out how big the planet is, how far away it is using Kepler's laws. And so they get an idea how big and how far away these planets are and start to think, well, they could be in a habitable zone. And so I think the science is really cool on that. So yeah, there are other planets out there called exoplanets, not just the solar system. Now, the latest estimate among those thousands of exoplanets they've already discovered that conceivably could support life is 45 to 70 of that batch which is somewhere around 1% of what has been observed, could support life. All right, so roughly our best guesstimate right now, about 1% of those planets could possibly support life. Now, the thing is, if there are, we'll say that if there are 14 factors for supporting life, we can't measure all those. I don't know if we can even tell if those planets have an atmosphere. I have a feeling they can't detect that. What's in that atmosphere? And all the other factors that go into supporting life that we need on Earth. So, but anyway, considering that there are trillions of stars and billions of galaxies, oh, just amazing. If randomness governs the creation of the universe, you could reasonably expect that there must be some planets capable of habitation. Yeah, so from that point of view, if everything is random, and that there might be some other planets out there that could support habitation. It might be millions of them. When you think about it, they you have to think about other issues like how does life arise from non-life? Okay, and we have never seen any good evidence for Darwinian style evolution. It just doesn't work. And so we'll talk about that someday. And if there is life out there, it would, from this perspective, from the Christian perspective, it would require God to allow life to exist there. All right. So now we young Earth creationists get into disagreements with the scientific materialists that we can't resolve. And most particularly, how can life start from non-life? And how can evolution proceed when there's no scientific evidence for either process? Oh, I would say it's not even close. Not even close. I'll have to get into that another day. Okay. Yeah. So I can't answer everything. I can't lay out everything in one video. So we'll look at that. And there's fantastic scientists out there who are working on this to say, like, it's just, we're not going to get life from non-life. It's just impossible. And including one of the world's great organic chemists, Dr. James Tour. Incredible guy. I gotta say, his videos for me are a little bit technical, a little hard to grasp. I got kind of a sense of what he's talking about, but I'm not a chemist, so a little tough there. But he's an incredible Christian, amazing guy, and he will tell you easily why no one's ever going to be able to create the molecules of life, much less figure out a way to put it together for something to live. So it's not even close. All right. Now, regarding the moon, mainstream science, I found this interesting. Mainstream science cannot yet explain why it exists. Okay. Now, they've had 4 big theories over the years. And so I don't call this to me, this is not a criticism that they can't explain its existence yet. Science is tough, and it's sometimes very hard to explain things. And so I do think people are sincerely working toward trying to understand why do we have the moon? Where did it come from? And now, if God's 6-day creation is correct, mainstream science will never successfully figure out how the moon came about. They're just going to keep contradicting themselves. Because if you're on the wrong side of the argument, you're not going to ultimately find confirming evidence that what you was actually wrong is going to be right. All right. Now, if you're on the correct side of that argument, then your evidence is going to support that. And that's part of my reasons for this channel, to start showing that there is evidence to support this Bible, this amazing account in the Bible. There really is strong evidence, and it's not well known. Not well known yet, but it's out there. So, okay, so now of those 4 major theories they've had through the years, the one that sticks, if anything sticks, is that, well, maybe Earth got hit by a big asteroid in the very earliest days when it was just molten lava and stuff like this, just a big ball of molten lava. And some of that broke off, and it ended up captured in the orbit of the Earth. And I think there's a problem with that. But anyway, that was the moon. The moon got created from the Earth. And so I think probably, people that don't want to believe, the book of Genesis, that's probably their best. Well, that's the best we got right now. But we're still looking at the problem. Okay. Now, there's evidence from the Apollo program and maybe some other instruments that have been put on the moon that the moon is not geologically dead. Now, the moon is about 4.2 billion years old. That might be one estimate I see. It's small enough. It's a rocky planet. It should have been cooled down by now. Should be no lava inside of it. Now, there is a little bit of lava in there. It's a low amount of activity has been observed, but the crust has moved slightly. We have these instruments from the Apollo program. They can shine lasers back and measure things very well. You can detect seismic activity, which is very low level, but you could reasonably expect that it should have been extremely entirely cold after 4 billion years. It would be totally geologically dead. All right, so and you find this in some of the moons in the solar system as well. Like, there's no way in the world a small object that old could still have geological activity. There's, I think, actually one of the moons of either Saturn or Jupiter has probably more volcanic activity per square mile than we do on Earth. Pretty amazing. I'd have to look that up. Is it Ganymede? I'm not sure. All right, now, kind of winding it up here, and oh, I love this part. And it's going to sound just utterly crazy to the scientific materialists. We only see one side of the moon from Earth due to the moon being tidally locked in its orbit around the Earth. Okay, I mentioned that earlier. Now, the other side of the moon, the far side, we'll call it, looks very different. How does it look different? Okay, and recently the Artemis 2 rocket went up, carried 4 people, and they went around the moon, went around the backside of the moon, took lots of pictures. We really have the backside of the moon very well mapped out. So here's what's going on. While both sides of the moon have impact craters, we see craters on the moon from sizable meteors. Only the side facing the Earth has very large formations due in part to lava flows. Okay, now science has a theory based on billions of years ago that the heat of the Earth caused thinner layers of rock on the side facing us. So this is not a bad theory, not a bad theory. We weren't there to observe it. We don't know for sure. What I'm about to tell you, we don't know that either. All right, it's just we're wrestling with historical science here, both sides of both camps of this debate. And now another possibility, which mainstream science is very unlikely to embrace. And by the way, that thin crust would allow big meteor impact to spew out some lava because those. I should go back to the screen. Because those big craters we see on our side of the moon, like for example, the Apollo 11 landed in the Sea of Tranquility, very large crater, and they could tell geologically it's from lava flows, partly formed from lava flows from whatever impacted it, penetrated the crust, spewed out lava. You don't see that on the backside of the moon, all right? All you see are the smaller craters, okay? And so, yes, that's what we see on the front side of the moon that is not on the back side of the moon. So now here's another possibility. Okay, we're gonna have some fun now. All right, which mainstream science will never embrace. I would say never embrace. Is that a wave of large meteors came from behind Earth over a short period of time, perhaps a day, and Earth would have been caught in the crossfire and also been impacted. All right, so you look at this, and don't read that last sentence. I don't want to distract it too much. Think about this. Okay, so here we are on Earth, minding our own business, meaning no trouble to anybody. And here comes this swarm of big meteors from behind us, headed right to the moon. And we're going to get caught in the crossfire. We're going to be hit by some of those big meteors. And that's going to create craters on Earth. And we do have craters on Earth. I got to see a big one out in Arizona, a meteor crater. It's a really spectacular crater out there. Very, very big. It's nearly a mile across, I think, about 600 feet deep. Okay, so because if these humongous impact craters came from periodically at random intervals, they could hit any part of the moon. They could hit any part of the moon. And but maybe there was a swarm of them that came right through us, hit us, some of them hit us, some of them hit the moon. It would maybe over the course of a day. I'm just kind of throwing out that number. You have to be pretty fast if all this happened at once. All right, so I know this is, this is creating some doubt. So it sounds crazy to the secular scientific materialist mind, but this may have been the mechanism that set off Noah's flood. What? Well, now let's see what the Bible says. In Genesis 7:11, it says, in part, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth. All right, so in Genesis chapter 6, chapter 7 talks about Noah's flood. And Noah builds this ark, which could have held all the animals of all the different kinds that could populate the earth after the flood. That's been calculated, a number of times. And they had room to spare on the ark, enough food and everything to last a year. Um, we'll have to talk about Noah's Ark someday. It's amazing, amazing thing. And Noah's Ark may still be out there. There's a formation near Mount Ararat in Turkey that looks like it could be a very large ancient boat under the ground. And it has the same proportions, same size as you expect from Noah's Ark. So someday I hope people will just go down and excavate that thing and see what's going on. Maybe that's it. Anyway, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, according to the Bible. So if we were a single landmass and we got hit from behind the moon, I mean, the moon's in front of us. Behind us, here comes the big meteors and craters and meteors and asteroids and stuff. Hits our landmass. It can break up, fracture the Earth, break up the continents, break up the big landmass into the other continents, flood the Earth enormously because if there's water underneath there, it just bursts forth. And amazing, amazing event, the Noah's flood. Okay, and look, there's one thing in all the Old Testament that science just absolutely hates to think about. It's Noah's flood. I would say that I keep hearing this, that's more of a bugaboo to the atheist, to the naturalist, the materialist, than anything else claimed in there. Noah's flood. But wow, you look at the evidence for the flood, a worldwide catastrophic flood. That evidence is enormous, and I can't wait to do a video on it. I just watched the video; it's just perfect, and I should link it, or I will link it eventually. And where an expert geologist talks about all this, I really don't know what I can add to that. So anyway, possibly that's a sign that those craters, those big, humongous craters, are there because of Noah's flood. Can't prove it. Can't prove it. All right, so here we see the principal conflict between scientific materialists and young age creationists. Both sides embrace experimental or observational science. No, we love science. There's nothing wrong with good science. In other words, science you can verify through experimentation, through repeated observation. Like the atomic bomb. We've set off some atomic bombs, and that shows that yes, hydrogen will fuse into helium. According to our calculations, it really does work. That's right. So that's why the sun shines. Both sides are saddled with historical science, trying to explain the past when no one was there to observe it, or when it cannot be repeated in the lab. So, all right. So we're both under a handicap, and so the scientific materialist side is leaning on their understanding and of things. They create theories and they're creating what I call a house of cards laid on sand. And and I think they think, well, these are good theories, they must be true. Must be true. The creationist side, well, let's see how the evidence supports the creation account in the Bible. Does it support it very well? Yeah. All right, so there we are. There's the big problem there, historical science, and so we end up in faith, and even scientific materialism, naturalism, atheism, whatever you want to call it, that contradicts the Book of Genesis is faith based. It's faith based on theories that we cannot prove in the lab. We cannot, we weren't there to observe it. So that's the problem. And same with the young creationist side. We can't prove this. It's faith based. All right, so there we go. I think I wrapped it up. And we'll shut it down and go from here. I hope to see you in day 5 and day 6 and beyond. And thank you for joining. And we'll hope to see you again. So it's time to roll the credits.